Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Ryan Lee, back here once again as your host. I hope you continue to stay safe amongst the pandemic, and we have a whole bunch of things to go over, including the as-promised quarterback review of all the pro days that have come out as of late, recent news concerning the NFL draft, as well as some of the latest going on, not only in the NFL, but in the NCAA on the basketball side as well. Let's get right into that one. So this year, the NFL draft is going to be hosted by Cleveland. It is going to be April 29th, I want to say, is the start date. And there's a lot of stuff that has been going on concerning the draft, whether if it is switching of picks, whether if it is coaches attending certain pro days or certain workouts or whatever it may be. However, one of the biggest things that when it comes to drafting is really what goes on. Because what goes on in large part is, I've mentioned this in a previous episode before, but not just some of these players get their life changed. Not only the players are having what is going to be a life-changing, most likely a life-defining moment for them, but a lot of these franchises as well, they're going to be going through their very own version of potentially a franchise-changing moment in some of these cases. Like, there have been so many instances where a player gets drafted, and whether the people knew it in the moment or not, it would change the trajectory of the franchise for essentially the next X number of years, depending on the situation. Let's say, for example, you were the New York Giants. It would be the Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers trade back in 2004. Or maybe you are in 2005, where Aaron Rodgers falls into your lap to learn behind Brett Favre. Or in some cases, you go back to 98. Peyton Manning gets taken instead of Ryan Leaf. Ryan Leaf turns into one of the biggest busts in NFL draft history. And Peyton Manning goes on and helps the Colts become a dominant force for the next 20 years. I've mentioned this topic many times before. However, one thing I haven't really talked about or thought about is the different ways in which evaluation comes and the different ways in which the circumstances these players go into really matter more than anything. In the past several weeks alone, maybe in the past week and a half to 2 weeks just by itself, I've been reading and listening and kind of absorbing all of this news and updates and reactions about what's to come in the NFL draft. And this draft, at least when it comes to that quarterback position, because it's so important this year, especially with all the fluctuations going on in the salary cap, it has become so much more riveting and so much more intriguing on what's going to happen because of those little things. And those quarterback controversies, those quarterback debates, who should go where, who should go to whom, who is the number one quarterback in this draft, is a debate that almost happens every single year. In some cases, there is a clear-cut number one. In some cases, you might have to flip a couple of things around. Like, we can go back just not that far ago. You are going to go to 2012. It was Luck versus Robert Griffin. The Colts had the number one overall pick. They just said goodbye to their franchise hero, essentially Peyton Manning, and instead of taking the dual threat in Robert Griffin, they go for the sure thing in Andrew Luck, who was the most sure thing since, ironically enough, Peyton Manning, who they just let go. And then you had RG3, he goes to Washington. He has a decent career there. However, some mishandling of his injuries leads to his career derailing and him essentially getting converted into nothing more than a backup and a bit of a journeyman alongside that. You had some other instances where you had a quarterback or maybe two where you're not exactly 100% sure where each would go. However, the fact that they went to their respective franchises really affected the way that their futures would line up. I've mentioned this example probably 100 times because it does matter, and it's the Peyton Manning Ryan Leaf one. You know, Peyton Manning, he comes in, he doesn't have the greatest rookie season, and then you get the introduction of Tony Dungy, who comes in, and I want to say Manning's second or third year or something like that. And then that combination of Dungy and Manning going together, it changes the entirety of the next 15 years in the AFC specifically. Peyton Manning wins a Super Bowl for Indianapolis. I believe it was the first one the Colts had since moving to Indianapolis, if I'm not mistaken. They made another Super Bowl after that. And then what does Ryan Leaf do? He has struggles, he has character issues, he has judgment issues, he just has every sort of issue, and all the stuff going on with that big California, at the time San Diego market, with LA basically right there. That California market escalates things and makes it worse. And then Ryan Leaf's career slowly goes into a downward spiral. And we can even take the example from 2018 especially. I love using this example because it is a great one to use. The big debate was Baker Mayfield versus Sam Darnold versus Josh Rosen versus Josh Allen versus Lamar Jackson. And the way those things lined up was that for whatever reason, Cleveland took Baker. He had some question marks going into it, had a really rough first 3 years of his career because he gets Hugh Jackson and then gets Freddie Kitchens, and then he finally finds something that he can work with in Kevin Stefanski. And then you have Sam Darnold. He was graded as a higher prospect amongst a majority of draft boards than Baker was. Darnold was, if I'm not mistaken, mostly ranked as the highest, if not second highest QB prospect that year. However, Sam Darnold's situation is he gets Adam Gase, a guy who gets heavily scrutinized about his coaching abilities. A guy who, when people leave him as a head coach, tend to do better. Ryan Tannehill did better when he was no longer the head coach there. If I'm not mistaken, almost every single place Adam Gase went, the second he leaves, the offense actually performs better without him. We'll have to see what happens with Sam Darnold in this new regime with the Robert Saleh era, but as of right now, with the way that possibly the free agents have been spending, or possibly with the structure that Robert Saleh is going to create, being from a previous Super Bowl contender, previous Super Bowl team in the 49ers just 2 years ago, could potentially revitalize Sam Darnold's career. Josh Allen, he gets thrown into a team where they're already playoff ready. They just made the playoffs the year before. The question was his development. Gets injured his rookie year, has a first full season, playoffs. Second healthy year, makes massive leaps again. Doesn't just make the playoffs, but qualifies for the AFC Championship game. Takes the Bills in Super Bowl contention. Rosen in Arizona wasn't exactly the best fit there. And the Cardinals coaching staff and the management group realized this quick and dumped him. Drafted Kyler, dumped him to the Dolphins. And then you had Lamar Jackson. He's already under a really good head coach in John Harbaugh. Goes into a system that fits his abilities in Greg Roman, that very mobile quarterback-y read option system. And then Lamar becomes an MVP. And there's a lot of questions on how that's going to affect the quarterbacks going into this draft as well. With guys like Trevor Lawrence going to Jacksonville. Yes, the Jacksonville Jaguars have not had the greatest history as of late. However, ever since the end of the Doug Marrone era, there's some sort of hope and optimism that things can get better. The biggest question mark right now with the Jaguars franchise and the trajectory they're on is Urban Meyer. And does his coaching translate into the NFL level instead of just kind of getting stuck at the NCAA level? Is he going to have a little bit of Nick Saban in him where he's been only college and then makes his way in the NFL and doesn't exactly pan out the same way because the coaching style doesn't mesh? Or is it going to be like a Pete Carroll, Jim Harbaugh type of deal? Maybe a Jimmy Johnson as well, where it absolutely translates well. And it can help Trevor Lawrence adapt quicker. Because some of the quarterbacks that Urban has worked with have succeeded so well at the college level, but then didn't necessarily translate the same way in the NFL. The only example I personally can think of where Urban has had any sort of success with a young quarterback after they left Urban in his system were Alex Smith. I could argue you could say Cam Newton as well. However, Cam Newton went back to JUCO, then went to Auburn. That's a whole big thing. But for the most part, almost every single quarterback that coached by Urban, whether if it was Ohio State, whether if it was Florida, whether if it was Utah, Bowling Green, etc., Urban knows his quarterbacks. Urban knows how to develop them. He knows how to coach them. Which I could argue is a reason why Urban's quarterbacks don't do so well on the next level, because their development curve plateaus. But with a guy as explosive as Trevor Lawrence, as big, as powerful, as talented, as shifty as Trevor Lawrence can be, Urban can make a lot out of Trevor Lawrence as long as the coaching just translates to the group of guys who are closer to 35 and 40 rather than 22 to 25. And then there's a lot of projection, a lot of speculation that Zach Wilson is going to go over to the Jets at number 2. That maybe there could be some sort of competition there between Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold. That the Jets want their own guy. Saleh wants his own guy. To be fair, Zach Wilson was absolutely electric in his pro day. There were so many throws where you just kind of keep your jaw wide open because you're surprised how good that was. There was this one specific play he made. I think he made it 3 times straight where he rolls right and then spins around, rolls left, fade away, and he launches it at least 55 yards out. He did that play 2, maybe 3 times, and every single time it was right on the money. It had that nice landing spot where if there was a second defender in the way, they would have a really tough time defending that ball because it was so well placed. Zach Wilson most certainly impressed on his pro day. And if anything, what it did was it created a larger cloud of curiosity in the Jets, or with who has the number 3 overall draft pick in San Francisco. In case you didn't know, San Francisco traded from 12 up to 3. And what the Miami Dolphins did when they switched picks with San Francisco was that Miami used some of the draft capital they got from San Francisco, and what they did was they gave it to Philadelphia and said, hey, we want 6. So instead of the Dolphins being at number 3, they now go to number 6. Instead of San Francisco being at number 12, the Niners are now at number 3. And the Eagles traded back from 6 to 12. And all that drama created a lot of speculation and a lot of hype about what John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan going to do now. It created a lot of speculation. It created a lot of second guessing. It created a lot of curiosity on what's going to go on next. Every single thing that Lynch and Shanahan are saying, they're saying that they're happy with Jimmy Garoppolo the way it is now. I do not buy that for a single second, because if they didn't, why would they trade to 3? They're going to trade to 3 for a lineman. They're going to trade to 3 for a receiver. They're going to trade to 3 for Jamar Chase or for Kyle Pitts. No way they would. If they are, they're going for a potential home run hitter. They're going for a guy like Trey Lance. They're going for a guy like Justin Fields. The question is, who is the guy and where is he going to fall? That's the big question there for San Francisco, because their O-line is still pretty solid. Their defense, for the most part, is the same defense that led them to the Super Bowl, minus a couple of COVID opt-outs, who are, if everything goes well, cannot back in. Same coaching staff, for the most part. And Kyle Shanahan knows his quarterbacks as well. He's developed some of the most interesting set of quarterbacks into some of the best levels they've ever played at. If I'm not mistaken, when Kyle Shanahan was in Washington, I believe those were 2 of the top 3 seasons that Kirk Cousins ever had. When Kirk Cousins started his career with Washington. When Kyle Shanahan was with Atlanta, what did he do? He helped run arguably the best offense in the league at the time, helped Matt Ryan become an MVP candidate, helped Atlanta get to the Super Bowl. And in many cases, it's because the defense is so dynamic, so explosive, so good at shutting down your team. But in that Atlanta team's case, the one where it was Dan Quinn a head coach, but Kyle Shanahan offensive coordinator, that offense just put up so many points. Their opponents, whomever they were, just couldn't keep up. And the last several years, he's not had the greatest record as a head coach. Sure, that's a knock against him. However, consider this. He's been working with backup players for most of that time. Last year, with the COVID opt-outs and the injuries, he was working with a second-string team. And the year before that, when his guys were all 100% healthy, they made it to the Super Bowl. I believe they were also the top seed in the NFC, won the division. Shanahan knows what he can do. But the question is Trey Lance or Justin Fields or whomever they're going to take at 3 an upgraded Jimmy Garoppolo? And if they are, then they have more than enough reason, more than a proper reason to take it. Because Kyle Shanahan knows an offense. It's the same thing with Sean McVay and the Rams, who now have Matt Stafford. And maybe they can make Matt Stafford's talent even greater because he finally has a coach, a support system around him that can actually work. Matt Stafford, throughout his entire career, had only 2, maybe 3 receiving targets per year. Now, Stafford easily has a great trio right there, plus an offensive line that can help, plus a defense that can actually help too. This year is one of the most interesting years in terms of that whole draft, scouting, opportunity, because not only is the market for quarterbacks as a whole rising, but also because with the fluctuating salary cap, getting them while they're young and making them effective while they're young and still on that rookie contract where they're not really spending that much has become extra valuable. One of the reasons why Patrick Mahomes has been so successful at such a young age is because he's still on a rookie contract. Therefore, what are they going to do with Mahomes? They're going to build a bunch of expensive short-term pieces around him so that by the time he gets the big money, he can have something to work with. One of the reasons why Tom Brady has been winning for so long is because he's been taking pay cuts. He's not at that top echelon of guys, the $40 million, the $30 million. He's only in like the low $20 million on average a year, but he spends that extra $20 million, potentially $15 million that he could have used on himself to buy depth pieces, potentially, or another relatively expensive star. That makes a huge difference on a team. It's why these first-round quarterbacks have become so much extra valuable. And also the window of which these quarterbacks have to get good is now smaller. It's almost a carousel. Quarterbacks are essentially given maybe no more than like 3 years to prove they've got what it takes. Josh Rosen had 2 years, and now he's a practice squad member. A number 10 overall draft pick is now barely rolling through practice squads. You have Tua Tagovailoa, just drafted last year. There's questions about his game. He could be done as soon as next year, at least as a starter. Daniel Jones, there's a lot of speculation on him, for example, that if the Giants don't make anything significant, they don't do anything significant, they're done after this year. They're going to go find someone else. The windows for these guys has become increasingly smaller and smaller. That's where guys like Mac Jones comes in. Not the prettiest deep ball, but somebody who is able to find those short, intermediate routes with pinpoint accuracy. Someone who isn't the most ideal looking quarterback. If you saw the photo of him without a shirt on, I believe after the national championship, but someone who's hyper intelligent, someone who's accurate, and someone who can make the right read, and who has that leadership presence to him and has that work ethic. Or someone like Justin Fields, who's got absolute cannon of an arm and has absolute wheels for legs. Even though there's questions on his character and his work ethic or whatever it may be, he has the natural born ability to do that type of stuff. It's why when he was on his pro day a couple weeks ago, his balls, his throws were very impressive, but a lot of them also showcased his ability to run as well, being able to run a 4.40, being able to show that he's not just a throwing threat, but he's a threat in the run game as well. And if you don't have one reason to draft him, he just gave you two. It's why these guys, these young quarterbacks coming out, become more and more impressive and become more valuable every single year. If I were to go through the last several quarterback debates at least, of this guy versus this guy, almost every single time you say that the best guy or the guy who landed in the best circumstance ended up getting the luck of the draw. Josh Allen landed in what is arguably the best situation. Lamar probably just as good, if not better. You go to the draft from 2 years ago in 2019, Daniel Jones in a very okay situation. His career's make or break this next year. Kyler got into a college system, keeps getting more and more weapons around him, and is steadily improving year after year. You go to 17, Mitch Trubisky had a very not as supportive offense, and he kept having to compete for his job every single year. That does a lot to a guy's confidence. But think of guys like Patrick Mahomes. His coach is Andy Reid, arguably the best offensive coach in the game. Nothing more to say about that. With the guys like Tyreek and Kelsey right behind him. Deshaun Watson goes to an offensive-minded coach in Bill O'Brien. But what does he have? He has DeAndre Hopkins and J.J. Watt with the assists on the opposite side of the ball. Jared Goff, he has a dumpster fire in his first year with Jeff Fisher, but then he gets Sean McVay. Arguably, almost without a doubt, one of the best young offensive minds in the game. Carson Wentz had Doug Peterson when they were still winning and they were still connecting. And the second that relationship turned sour, so did Wentz's results. He could potentially revitalize his career in Indianapolis with Frank Reich at head coach. Who knows? Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota were both kind of screwed by circumstance. But also, Jameis Winston's inability to keep the ball away from the other team really hurt him. We'll see what he does in the Sean Payton system this year. Those are just a couple of the examples of what the quarterbacks have been able to do because of the circumstances around them and the way they reacted to everything going on. It's not purely talent. It's not purely circumstance. It's not purely based on how hard or how lazy you are. It's a combination of all those things combined. As long as you're in the right situation, with the right amount of talent, and you have the right mindset, whoever gets picked wherever is going to be fine. Which is why I think the only guys out of this list of 5, Wilson, Lawrence, Fields, Lance, Jones, is going to be the guys who are just extraordinarily talented and have almost no possibility of failing. Who's Lawrence? They get to go to one of the brightest offensive minds in the game in a culture where they've already experienced winning and just getting over that hump. San Francisco. Or possibly going to a young and up-and-coming team. A team who's very young, very youthful, doesn't really have a lot going on so far, but with the right quarterback in place can absolutely explode and change the expectations of not just a single team, but an entire city. Miami, possibly Atlanta. I'll obviously have more on this when the time comes, but as more information comes out, we'll need to figure it out. That's all I've got in terms of drafting in the NFL draft, along with some of the rookie QBs coming in. And coming up right after the break, we've got some news involving some of the latest in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. That's all coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
I want to mention something that literally just happened not that long ago. Believe it or not, at the time I'm recording the second segment, The NCAA men's basketball tournament literally just ended, maybe within the past couple of minutes. I have intentionally waited until the men's basketball tournament actually ended because I want to talk about it. Because literally the winner of the whole tournament and the result of the Final Four section of things was actually going to dictate my next segment. And the reason why I did that is simply put because there was so much drama going on and so much shock and awe over everything that happened. Now, I believe a couple of weeks ago, I went into a little bit about the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I went to March Madness a little bit and why the whole culture behind March Madness is so much greater than the cultural impact of the college football playoff. Now, when it comes to things like culture, when it comes to things like the impact things have on society and the way that it carries on throughout the minds and opinions of the general public, perception and reputation most certainly matter. Now, March Madness has been around for an extremely long time. It is literally one of the greatest and most revered tournaments in probably all of sports. You have the Olympics, you have the World Cup, you have the Stanley Cup, the World Series, if you specifically look at the finals. You have the Super Bowl, once again, if you're looking only at finals. The Champions League. And in that mix of those great tournaments, where it's not just the final, but the tournament itself, the first round, second round, third round, semifinals, Final Four, all that good stuff, March Madness ranks up there. Yes, I can go with the Olympics. Yes, I can go with, if I want to go with a more worldwide popular tournament, I can go with the Champions League or the World Cup. You can definitely put the Stanley Cup on there as well. But right up there, in terms of some of the biggest tournaments in the entire world, I can honestly put March Madness up there. Any tournament, anything that has its own nickname automatically deserves high praise. That's just my opinion of it. If anything has just that one thing it has to differentiate itself from every other tournament in the same league. The reason why the Olympics is so much greater than any other sports tournament in the world, you know, it's the greatest swim meet, track meet, archery competition, shooting skeet competition, judo wrestling competition. Or if you want to go into the winter stuff, it's the greatest bobsled, the greatest luge, the greatest skiing tournament in the world. If you want to talk about all of soccer as an entire country, representing your country in a single sport, you really look to the World Cup. That culmination of the most popular sport in the entire world, where every man and woman, if you include the Women's World Cup as well, represents their country on their back, with one tournament on the line of the most famous sport in the world. You kind of get those similar things. And then you have the greatest college basketball tournament. The top players from around the country, in some cases transferring or getting scholarships with other players from around the world, getting them in one tournament, 68 teams down to one. And the reason why I mention any of this is because the runs that were had, whether if it was in the Final Four or whether it was in the fact that the Baylor Bears won it all, it was absolutely improbable. Like, tell me how this makes sense. It's UCLA versus Gonzaga. Gonzaga is up, I believe, only 2. UCLA has a chance to tie it with a pair of free throws, and they make both. Gonzaga misses on the other end. UCLA has a chance on the opposite side of the floor, but because of a charge, what does UCLA do? Cause an offensive foul. So possession is lost. And then it goes to overtime. And here's Gonzaga, the number 1 team in the country, undefeated, 30-0 during the year, versus a number 11 seed UCLA. They had to play a play-in game. UCLA had to play a game just to qualify as part of the top 64. They were number 65 to 68. And UCLA, a number 11 seed, made its way all the way into the Final Four. Now, why does any of that matter? Because it shows the craziness that the tournament can be. Upset after upset, this UCLA team, this Bruins team just kept on fighting, kept on pushing of every single chance it had. And it pushed Gonzaga, the number 1 team in the entire country, to the very end, to the brink. To the point where UCLA had to recover its own rebound to tie the game and try to force double overtime. And what does Gonzaga do at the other end? It goes a half-court buzzer beater to win the game. Literally a Hail Mary. Just the roll of the dang ball in the general direction of the basket and just pray to God. And it goes in. Gonzaga makes it through. The number 1 team in the country hangs on by a thread. And after a win like that, so emotionally draining, what comes next? The Baylor team has a lot of momentum on its side. It's been dominating teams left and right. No real opponent has really stuck up to them this entire tournament. The Gonzaga team could be it. But no. Baylor is ready for everything Gonzaga has ready. What do they actually do? Actually, they become so dominant, especially inside of the paint, where it forces arguably Gonzaga's best player or 2 best players to be in foul trouble, putting them in thin ice the rest of the game, making them have to tread carefully. And what happens? Gonzaga loses in the last game. And I believe the Bruins had 3 losses to them the entire year. And the reason why I mention any of that or all of that, to be fair or to be specifically exact, it is because in the CFP, you don't get that. In the case of the CFP, specifically in the instance of Texas A&M, 1 loss ruins your season. You have to stay perfect in order to win the national championship in college football, which I think, by the way, is one of the biggest flaws in the system, because it reduces the drama of it completely. I've talked about this in the last time I reviewed it. The drama, the parody, any sort of excitement is just killed. Who wants to see Clemson, Ohio State, and Alabama every single year, and that 4th team is just essentially a warm-up game for Alabama or Clemson or whoever the number 1 seed is? No one wants to see that. But there's still so much hype around it, so much media attention, because it's what the media focuses on, because get the ratings up. I've talked about it in the past with the NCAA tournament, where a lot of times the little guys win in the NCAA basketball tournaments. Oral Roberts made it to the Sweet 16. Syracuse made it to the Sweet 16. Oregon State, a school that's not really that well known in either sport, made it all the way into the Elite 8. Gonzaga is only known for basketball, and it made its way to the finals. Baylor hasn't had a good football team since Robert Griffin III. They won the whole thing in its very first ever national championship title. And that's the beauty of March Madness, is literally any team can win, and not only can they win, but not just beat the overwhelming famous, steamroll them by about, I want to say it was like 16 points, 14 points, something like that. And not just do that, but do that all on their very first national championship ever, where their coach made a promise to the school that they bring back a national championship 17 years ago. I remember they played a clip of the Baylor current head coach where he promised Baylor, the campus and the university, a national championship 17 years ago. And he finally fulfills that promise, cutting down the net. Also, speaking of which, name a cooler tradition in sports. College sports, at least. Because in football, you get the classic Gatorade dump, sure. Nothing wrong with that. You get some of the bowl games, they might fill the bowl with whatever weird thing. Like in the Rose Bowl, you get a physical bowl full of roses. Or in the Citrus Bowl, you literally get a bowl full of oranges. So on and so forth. But the cutting of the net is a tradition that I believe just goes so underrated. It's one that almost never gets recognized. You take that ladder, you take those scissors, and you cut that individual piece of cloth, that string. What do these guys work for? What do these guys spend all that time and effort for? A GD piece of string from a basketball net. But that piece of string is, in some of the cases for some of those guys, the most important piece of string of their lifetime. And in an era where most of the top NBA stars go at most, just their freshman year. And there was actually some talk that the NBA might go back into the high school days where you're allowed to draft at 18. That piece of string is the most revered piece of string in all of sports. And probably the entire world. I can't think of a more sought after piece of string. But it's the meaning behind it. Winning with your guys. The guys you fought so hard. That blood, sweat, and tears. The ability to hold up the trophy, that merch. The ring that comes after. The only other tradition in all of collegiate sports I can think of that's nearly as good is, and I use this example a lot because I know it, but there's no other cool tradition in sports, at least in the collegiate side, aside from the Gatorade bath. That's very traditional in all of football. But the cutting of the net in basketball, and the only other one I could say is probably in swimming, but the coaching staff as well jumps in the pool and they just celebrate and hug in the pool. Like, imagine doing a celebration after a championship, but watching your coach have to stay afloat while they're wearing khakis and a polo shirt. I've seen it before. It's hilarious. But it's also one of the most meaningful experiences. You get that opportunity, you get that chance to celebrate with the people you're closest with the people who you've literally sacrificed months, and in the case of some of these seniors, years with. In some of these guys' cases, they're brand new to the game. They've only sacrificed a year. Some of these upperclassmen, they have sacrificed 4. Red shirts 5. Coaches probably 20 plus. And with the head coach of North Carolina, Roy Williams, recently retiring, it's going to be a passing of the torch potentially in North Carolina. It's one shining moment where 68 teams becomes one. And in one of the craziest potential landscapes of all of sports, where literally anything is possible, by the words of the great Kevin Garnett, anything is possible. Literally reviewing whether or not the ball leaves someone's fingertips before a red light goes off. Literally what it is these guys, 18 to 22, working their butts off to not only hoist a trophy, but to get one of the greatest pieces of string in the world. It's what not only makes March mad, but it's also what makes March magnificent. That's all I had for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to share us, like us, rate us 5 stars, write us a comment, like and share us everywhere you go. But make sure you subscribe as well for more here on the GSMC College Football Podcast. For all of us here at the GSMC Podcast Network, this has been the GSMC College Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Lee. I hope you have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.